Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. In this episode of Greenhouse Grower to Grower, we are veering away from our traditional approach of inviting growers as guests, but there's a great reason for that. One of the things I look forward to every year at Cultivate is the preliminary release of the Garden Media Group's annual Trends Report. Even if your role in this industry doesn't give you a chance to have direct conversations with consumers, or perhaps because of that, the report is a great way to get caught up on what consumers are most interested in when it comes to gardening, outdoor lifestyles, plants, engagement, and more. The Garden Media Group released its official 2025 Trends Report in early September. In this episode, I sat down with Katie Dubow, president of Garden Media Group, to get a firsthand look at what's in this year's report and how you as a grower, or if you're in another segment of the industry, can respond. Here's our conversation. Let's start with the whole Growing Media Group Trends Report that comes out every year. I'd like to learn how you started developing that in the first place. What was the reason behind it? And what are some of the goals that you have from year to year?
Well, that takes us way back to 2000, the year 2000, if you can believe it. And the Philadelphia Flower Show actually called my mom. So Garden Media Group, we're celebrating 36 years this year, Brian, in 2024. Awesome. And so this trend report, the first one was in 2001. So this is our 24th report, the 2025 edition. That was a lot of numbers. But we are the Philadelphia Flower Show, which is here where Garden Media Group is based in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
They called my mom, Susie McCoy, and they said, we want some help with next year's show. We are looking at themes. We don't know exactly what we're going to do. We want to know what some of the trends are. And she thought, well, aren't you the trendsetter? Like, why are you coming to me for this? And the rest is history. That year's trend was France because the Mayon Rose, Connor Pyle was working with the House of Mayon to launch all these new French roses, and the theme of the flower show was France. And so there were just a lot of wonderful themes that tied together to create the 2001 report, which has evolved, of course. You know, you asked about like what the goals are. So I think at the time, our report, to be honest, had been criticized over the years. Now it's 21 years old, but for being too self-serving for our clients. And I think that when it first came out, we did, our bread and butter is paid by our clients. So we are a PR firm. We specialize in horticulture. And I don't fault my mom for doing that. You know, she said, oh, here are some interesting things that I'm seeing that my clients are doing.
Yeah.
We have to remember too, in that time, we weren't living in such a connected world. You know, we weren't able to look on TikTok and see what the social threads were that were tying everybody together. Yeah. And so I think for her to see that there were multiple clients who are doing something French themed, that seemed like not a coincidence. So I can't fault her for that. But over the years, the report has primarily, the goal is to help our industry see where our customers are and help meet them there. So, you know, I think horticulture is cool now. Since the pandemic, everybody and their mom and their grandma gardens, but it used to just be their grandma, right? So like now we are reaching all demographics, but nobody really ever called us hip. You know, we're maybe not like the hippest, coolest industry of the 2000s, early 2000s. And so what we really look to our trends report to do is to help our, growers, landscapers, garden centers, the whole entire industry see where we think the future of just consumer media, consumer marketing, consumer shopping behaviors are.
Yeah. So I know, you normally, in the past few years at least, you've done a teaser Cultivate where you kind of look at, here's what our trends are likely going to look like in this next report. And then the official version comes out roughly early September, mid-September. Yep. What sort of adjustments do you tend to make each year then based on, the feedback that you get from that initial overview?
We are so lucky to have this relationship with Cultivate. And I love the energy. Someone approached me this year and it was two women from a garden center. They said they had been taking bets on what the color of the year was going to be. So I feel so lucky that we now get to use it as a testing ground because it really is for the industry. Now, consumers read the report, mainstream consumer media reads the report. So, it does have a wide reach, but it is for the industry. So for us to be able to have this testing ground where we throw that spaghetti at the wall we think is what's going to stick, but then having an audience of, hundreds of people to gauge their reactions is so valuable. So what I do is number one, look at faces. So when I'm doing the presentation at Cultivate, there's inevitably someone sleeping, someone, there's always that person. But beyond that, the people who are nodding and smiling and clapping and laughing, like, what is their response to the trend? That visceral first reaction. And so I want to know, okay, people they're liking this trend. And then what we get the most out of Cultivate is people who approach me afterwards and give me anecdotes. Mm-hmm. So the one that makes me think of the most is Rogers Garden Center has a program with the Audubon Society. And a couple years ago, Ron, I can't pronounce his last name, but the manager there approached me and told me about this program and how much money they are giving back to their local Audubon chapter. Okay. And that was a trend that correlated with how people are doing birding. And we were just, it's one thing to be at Cultivate and be able to share that these are trends, but what we then are able to do is put in the report real industry examples.
Right, yeah.
So what are growers growing? What colors are they seeing, fly that their customers are buying? What are those real world examples? Because as much as we try to have our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry, you can't know everything.
Right,
so
of course.
It really helps us to have examples of people in the industry to look to say, this is not just something that's happening in fashion. Look, it's happening in our industry. This person is doing it successfully. You can try it too.
Right. How early do you start working on the upcoming report each year?
Yesterday. We pretty much, as soon as Cultivate wraps, we worked up to the report, let's say Cultivate's July 20th. We're still editing it up to like July 18th. Okay. So we are really pushing the boundaries there for July. Then we do make a couple tweaks up to when it's launched, which is, like you said, usually early September. And then once that's kind of put to bed, we start working on the following year. So it does take us a full year. Our ramp up is in March. So March is when we have our kickoff meeting. We've all been compiling trends that we think are valuable throughout that first part, end of the year, first part of the year. But that's when we really start to kick off our planning for the following year.
Okay. I would imagine that the fluctuations of the past 4 or 5 years have made that especially challenging, just kind of giving, here's where the consumer is this year. They might be in a totally different place 6 months down the road. And then 6 months after that might be a completely new place again.
The best example of that was COVID and our report that we had already started planning pre-COVID, in March 13, 2020, Sober Curious was one of our trends. So we noticed that people were growing more herbs to try in mocktails and they weren't drinking as much.
Yeah.
Well, then we all know what happened over the pandemic. That went right out the window. So we just had to scrap that trend. We'd worked so hard on it. Luckily, we've kind of swung back around to that. So we were able to incorporate some of those elements this year. It wasn't a full, complete trend, but, our behaviors are getting to be a little bit more like they were pre-pandemic. Okay.
So you talk about, making adjustments to a trend. Looking back, do you see any examples of trends that you really nailed? You could say, okay, we were definitely spot on with this one.
Well, my favorite and most recent example was the lime green color of the year last year. I don't know how many people follow the brat summer trend, but that was a big hashtag this year and it was all over the place. And the color was lime green. And so it was really fun for us to be able to say, okay, not only did we call that color of the year, it was all over Target. It was just a beautiful example of how it was 2023 when we did that. It was a year before. Yeah. And if a retailer or a garden center or a grower had jumped on that trend, they would have been able to be ahead of it to show their customers how in tune they were with that color. And, it's just a color. It's just for fun. We're not suggesting painting, your entire facility that color, but to be able to have some social media content planned, some blogs planned, I think would have been easier on people for them to get ahead. So that's my favorite one. And we did a reel on it on Instagram about how we were having our own brat summer. It's a pop culture trend for nobody who was like, what is she saying, brat? It's the name of an album by an artist named Charlie XCX. So it was that one was really fun. some of our older, you did a great, maybe we can put in the notes one of your older stories that you did a wonderful recap of some of our past trends and how they were successful, if we can dig back and find that. But
that'll be an easy one. That
was so insightful for me because we don't look back enough. We really don't look back enough to see what actually did come to fruition. But a lot of the things that we predicted, years ago, the rise of the McMansion and the outdoor living room. And then we started to predict the downsizing and how people were out with that McMansion style and in with smaller garden styles. So a lot of these movements we have in our trend report. And someone asked me once, what's the difference between, something like native plantings or pollinators?
Right.
I don't see those in your trends anymore. And the answer to that is it's not a trend. Gardening for wildlife is not a trend anymore. That is a movement. When it first happened in 2007, we were working with the American Beauties brand and we started talking about the rise of an interest in native plants. That was the trend in the moment. It hadn't happened. It was starting. And now we are so excited that it is a movement now. So that's why things like that you see are not in the report as trends, because it's a little bit more mainstream.
Yeah. When you answered the question I was just going to ask you is, when does something emerge from that trend stage to the full reality stage? So, I mean, that's awesome to hear. You I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, when Honey Nut Cheerios takes the bee off of their box to show the bee decline. Now we know honeybees, are different when I do, but that's when it's reached mainstream.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and you talked about doing the reel on Instagram too. I would imagine over the years, how you roll out these trends to a full audience has to have evolved as well.
I was just thinking about that the other day. Now we can provide this electronic download. Before, when my mom was doing this, we would email them to people. Even before we would we used to mail press releases. I remember as a kid folding press releases, licking the envelope for my mom, licking a stamp, and mailing press releases. So it definitely, it makes us more efficient. It makes us be able to reach, our report is downloaded by over 10,000 people a year, but I believe the reach is far wider than that because, the number of people listening to the podcast and the people who might share the report with somebody, it's like a magazine in a dentist office. You really don't know how many people look at it. So we know it's far wider of a reach than that. We couldn't have had that kind of reach in 2001.
Right. Well, and speaking as somebody who used to receive that envelope, then open it up, get a paper cut, and often have to retype what was in that piece of paper that was in there. I certainly appreciate the fact that I can get it in a PDF or just go to a website, put my name in, and there it is right in front of me.
Right. Isn't it? It's amazing. It makes us more efficient. Of course, that means we have to do more in a day. That feels like sometimes it's endless. But we have a whole now editorial calendar of the ways that we're going to promote our trends. So I just had a meeting today about it, in fact. What are the things that we're going to do on social media? I already, of course, pitched it out to our trade media. So let's get some stories that are specific to growers, some stories that are specific to garden centers. So we have this whole editorial calendar on how we're going to help maximize the reach.
Well, and you talk about growers there, and that sort of transitions into, let's talk through what's in this year's report. Before we get to that, I do want to ask, if somebody wants to get a copy of it, what can they do?
So we have the 2025 report and every one of our past reports available on our website, gardenmediagroup.com/trends. So you'll see the freshest report is always going to be the first thing you see, but right there over on the right-hand side is a list of past reports.
Okay. Well, let's walk through this year's trends. And I've got a couple of favorites that when we get to those, I'll kind of call them out for my end. So I really want to turn over to you at this point and just have you kind of go through, what some of the trends are for this year. And again, if I'm a grower in this industry, especially somebody who doesn't always have that direct consumer connection, what can I do to take advantage of some of the great information that's in here?
Sure. Well, so our trends, we'll start off by talking about the overarching theme and I'm going to do this. We're not going to do the full, this takes an hour. Right. So my feedback at Cultivate was, she ran over. But it was 5 minutes. Come on, people. But we do have 8 trends this year. So sometimes we have 7, sometimes we have 9, but this year we have 8. So I don't think we'll need to cover all 8 because I'm not sure each one is exactly relevant to growers. But like you said, you can always go to the website, download them. But the way that our report works, if you haven't heard me speak before, what I like to tell people is that we have an overarching theme. It's like the title of a book. Right. It ties the entire report together, and each trend within the report either directly or very loosely ties back to our overarching theme. And this year's theme really was born by visiting the Philadelphia Flower Show and looking at pictures from Chelsea, because I didn't attend, sadly. One day, Brian, it's on my bucket list. And there were a couple gardens at each of those shows that showed us this future of where we believe horticulture is going. And then as we started to do some research, we realized there's the one stat that really stuck out to us was that 84% of newly built single-family homes sold in 2022 were part of an HOA, a homeowners association. Okay. And so when I picture a homeowners association, a neighborhood that's part of an HOA, I picture, that old Melvina Reynolds song, Little Boxes, this swath of the same, all the same, not just in their colors or their choices of siding, but their plant material. And when we saw that 84% of newly built single family homes were part of an HOA, it was like, so this is what our customers are dealing with. This is what they're seeing every day. And this is not what horticulture is.
Yeah.
This is not what we see as horticulture. It's a lawn and 2 shrubs, tiny little shrubs planted 3 feet from each other. So, and then you connect that with these flower show gardens. And it was Kelly Norris, Apiary Studio, and a man out of Chelsea who his name was Robert Myers. Okay. So we had these multiple gardens that looked like nature taking back over our cities. And it was beautiful. And those one of them won the overall best award at Philly. And I was at the show and I could see people's reaction to, oh, wouldn't this be amazing if our cities could return to nature? And in Chelsea, there was a sidewalk crack garden. It was 2 pieces of concrete and what was growing out of the middle. And so what we really, just to keep it short, the future that we see is that people are no longer going to accept this bland, boring version of horticulture that they've been served for the past decade, couple of decades. And that in the future, we are going to see a much more, natural design forward style. And the question is going to be is how do people like it? How do they like the idea of maybe what they might see as a weed in a suburban garden when it's growing in an urban garden and has a beautiful flower? What are we calling it? And so cities are going to have to adopt these strategies, quite frankly, because the lack of access to nature is stunning. And so we know the benefits are broad and we know that they are there. And so the overarching theme here really is about integrating horticulture into our everyday lives and how that's going to look for the future and how different it's going to look than it is now.
Yeah. Okay.
So a couple trends. Let's start with a social media trend, and one that many people might be thrilled to hear that from our obsession or our addiction, I should say, to social media. So listen, it's a necessary evil for many of our businesses. It is a way for us to communicate. You and I just spent 5 minutes talking about how we are sharing our trends and are maximizing the reach using the modern technology that we have.
Yeah.
But we also know that we are addicted, we are exhausted, we are wary of the around-the-clock connectivity that we have. And it's really stressing us to points beyond what our mental health can take. And there's a firm called Gartner. They do like what Nielsen does. They rate social media user habits. And they predict that 50% of users are going to dramatically reduce their usage of the major platforms over the next year.
Okay.
And for us, this really shows a return to authenticity. Online, it's this fake world that has been created. And we think that this future of, being less social might actually mean more connection. And it's actually really good for our industry. Because when people get off their phones, right, where are they? They're actually in the real world where we have plants and products and the ability for them to connect with nature. So we go into this trend, and one of the big suggestions here is that people aren't necessarily leaving online communities. They're just leaving the big ones that they don't trust anymore. Yeah. So they're finding local niche communities. So, there's one called Strava, which is a running app. full disclosure, I don't use it, Brian. I'm not a big runner. I don't know about you, but maybe someone out there is, and they know this app. But there was an article in The Guardian last week that said, is Strava the new Tinder?
Okay.
Which is an online dating app, for those of you who don't know. Someone told me. But which means, is Strava the new Tinder? Is this niche running app the new way that people are meeting up or meeting in real life, and not just finding like friendship connections, but romantic connections?
Yeah.
And what does that mean for us as an industry, for growers? It shows that our customers are going to start to leave these major platforms, which means great, they're going to have more time for gardening, but also that we need to provide, there's no real great social, smaller network out there, niche network for gardening. Yeah. So our maybe growers, customers, they need to create something where people can go and share their love of plants. Now, on these, like Strava, they have runs that go through botanic gardens, and they have nature walks. They have runs that are through neighborhoods with lots of tree cover. Mm-hmm. So there are people who are interacting on these apps, or not apps, but niche communities who care about horticulture.
Yeah.
We're really looking for ways for our customers to narrow in on what their interests are and help them create community around those interests.
It's kind of funny. I did a interview yesterday with another grower, and he was telling me that some of his newest, youngest team members, they're the ones that are off their phones, and they look kind of funny at the ones who are sitting there on their phones most of the day. And it's like, what are you doing? I mean, there's other things that we could be doing besides being on our phones. So that really struck me there.
Yeah, I think I've been seeing so much about this particularly Gen Z saying, our parents gave us phones when we were 8 years old, and now we're sick of it. Like we're over it. Now, you and I didn't have that same kind of upbringing, but they're evolving, which is cool, which is great.
Yeah. I'm going to guess that you're going to jump into the next trend, and I'll tell you that that's the one that I'm most excited about, but I'll let you carry on with it.
Awesome. You're a big music fan.
Yes, I am. Yes. In fact, when I saw that the report come out, first thing I did was add the playlist to my Spotify list. So.
I love it. Thank you. Well, I got an email from Lloyd Traven, Peachtree Farms, another grower, and he said, listening bars, rock on. Love the trend report this year, or a text from him. So you are not alone. And I think in our industry, we know many of us being creative, being outside, music and gardening go hand in hand. And so that's not really what's new here. For us, the interesting way is how we look at music. So the trend actually started from the idea of listening bars. And so you and I were talking about being the trend of sober curious, and how that fell out of the lineup during the pandemic. It actually made its way back into this trend because, the restaurant scene over the last 10 years has evolved. It used to be sometimes I would go to a restaurant, you can't see the menu. It's so dark. The music's so loud, you can't hear the person across from you speak. That's right. The clubstaurant scene. And that, I think people just didn't, that's not fun. That's not what we want anymore. We want to connect with people. We want authenticity, which again is like another through line for this trend. And at these listening bars, there's a DJ and they're spinning records and they have a theme. And why can't we do this in our industry? Of course, this is more of a suggestion for garden centers, but what about hosting a bring your own vinyl night? I mean, would you not jump at the chance to attend something like that?
Absolutely, yeah.
I would be all over it. And so we have some suggestions in this particular trend on how garden centers can really capitalize on getting a new audience, because not only are we talking about Gen Z, like out with the phones, they're loving vinyl. So this idea of vintage, what's old is new again, not necessarily a real big trend. It's been a big popular thing for a while, but in enabling that to connect with your garden center and give this generation and many, many others a chance to connect with music and see how it ties them back into nature. So we think that there's lots and lots of ways. One of the ways I think growers, it'd be really, really fun to pick a song and align a song with the release of a new plant or a new collection, or at the very least, what genre? If you don't want to have a song, I know there's some, rights to music and there's a lot of fees beyond that. But What about aligning a genre with a new plant? Is it a rock and roll style plant? Is it more of a blues plant? And I think that will help people who are already engaging with music so much in their daily life further help connect them to our products that we sell.
Well, and those different musical styles too. I appreciated reading through the report of that because my wife always tells me the music you listen to is too dark and too depressing. Well, I mean, I can't help it, but I'm also then drawn to some of those darker plants. I went to Costa season premiere last year, and I think where I took the most photos was, they call them their other goth combinations. I mean, I just love those, and that speaks to me. But whatever you come up with speaks to whoever your audience is going to be is great.
Yeah, well, one of the examples we give of, like, if you're going to do a bring your own vinyl night and make it an Ozzy Osbourne night, if you want, make sure you are matching the plants, have a mocktail or a cocktail that's associated with that, and then have your goth plants on display. Like, make sure the theme really ties through. And you're right. I think it's important to let people know what to expect. So someone like you who is more interested in that kind of music will attend that kind of event. You don't want someone who really is looking for a classical and they show up and it's an Aussie night,
Right, yeah.
All right. Well, this next one we could skip over, but I'm not going to, because it's probably the weirdest one in the entire report. And I, have to remind everybody, a report is not to make you comfortable. It is not something that you sit and you nod your head the whole time in agreement, like, yes, I knew that. Yes, I knew that. We really are meant to stretch beyond what you know. And this is our AI trend. That's the other thing. When we started the report, we knew we needed to talk about AI this year.
Sure.
I don't think that I was just on a call actually this morning talking about the AI generated garden spaces where you can take a picture of your house and, then plug and play the plants in. The technology is just not there yet. And one of our clients was like, do we really want to lean into that? If we go this other direction, that means we're probably not going to focus on that for a year. And it was like, do what you can now. Don't pause doing something because you're going to wait for the AR to catch up. If that means doing a podcast, if that means writing blogs, making your content a little bit more personalized to your customer.
Yeah.
Do that what you can now. The AR, the VR, that stuff is a couple years down the pipeline. And so I, as an industry, I think sometimes we're getting caught up in this. And one of the things that this trend we're really trying to help people understand is, let's not assign a good or bad to it. Because a lot of the content I see online, I don't know about you, but it's a picture of an unusual coleus or, caladium in particular with these amazing kind of painted colors on it. And it's from somebody in the industry saying, it makes me so mad when I see these unreal plants. How is the customer ever, some rant. And I get it. I get it. How are we going to achieve success if the bar is set so high?
Right.
However, we also have to understand that if we berate our future customers, these people are probably not gardeners yet. If these are the kinds of spaces they're playing in, if they're in the virtual worlds, if they're sharing pictures of these images that are fake, they're probably not yet gardeners. But they seem like they love plants, right? If they're sharing these images, and if we're knocking them down and making them feel bad for not knowing it, do we think that's going to create this, continue to create that beautiful, welcoming culture that gardening has done for centuries? Or are we further alienating some of these people who might be dipping their toes in the water?
Yeah.
So that's really the point of this trend, is that we want to help people understand that these are places people are playing in. They are in these virtual spaces. We have virtual backgrounds on our, remote calls. We are, from the TVs, you look and you pull up a YouTube channel. I just had a Christmas event with Costa Farms, if you can believe it, Christmas in September. And we went to pull up a Christmas playlist on YouTube, and the whole thing was this AI-generated winter scene. The whole time it played like just, a woodland with snow falling. It was beautiful. These are the things that our customers are seeing on a daily basis, whether they're in a nail salon, a grocery store, just listening to music at home. And so they're used to it. It doesn't mean that they won't also find beauty in their outdoor spaces. And one of our suggestions in this particular trend is to help them see where the real beauty is in our landscapes, showing them that fake plant that you posted, we've got something even better. Here's a picture of it, and this is real. You can actually have this in your garden, because we know we've got some, we call them tyrannically cute plants, but we just have some gorgeous. I mean, we're so lucky to be in an industry that we actually have the content that the internet wants. We don't have to do much to get that engagement. And so to share with people in a more positive light that their dreams, what they're creating, these virtual worlds they're creating that they want to live in, can be a reality.
Yeah. I completely get that. I mean, I think too, it's all about, I mean, you can't, as you said, turn away and be scared of what's there in the future. You don't have to necessarily jump all over it right now, but it's going to be, it's going to be a reality. And, how you use it is going to be up to you.
Yep. So, all right, let's go to our next two trends and the next one has actually been the most popular with our consumer media. It's called lived-in gardens. Okay. And it's kind of a sleeper because I love it, but by far it was not my favorite. But it's been the one that when we pitched this out to consumer media, they said, "Oh, can you answer some questions for me about lived-in gardens?" Huh. So the idea of lived-in gardens comes from this idea of a broader shift or a broader societal craving for authenticity. Again, that word, it's shown up in almost every trend, but it's manifested itself in the idea that vintage Rolexes, I read this article in the Wall Street Journal, are outselling new ones. Mm. Somebody wants, these, especially younger people, but people want to have things that look like they lived a life. I don't want the shiny and the brand new. I want something that might look sentimental, like, my grandfather, this was my grandfather's watch, but it is the idea of sentimentality, something that you can cherish, that you can keep, that is not throwaway. This new generation is not really into the throwaway fashion. I think one of the newsletters, it might have been Ellen Wells' newsletter, but she shared a FedEx report on why FedEx is having a great quarter. And they attribute it solely to people reselling their items. Yeah. And like me shipping my old sweater to somebody across the country because they bought it online. So this idea of reduce, reuse, recycle is really coming around and showing up. And so we saw that as a broader trend that's happening out in the world. Yeah. And so we're thinking, how can that correlate to gardens? And to us, what it meant was, do older, more mature, lived-in landscapes really make a difference, not just in people's, lives, but in the value of their homes? Yeah. Now, we know that there was research on that at some point, but last year, Virginia Tech just completed research that said a well-landscaped home can get you a 13% increase in property value. That, to us, just shows that these lived-in landscapes add so much value. And we also get a lot of requests from media. And we were getting these as we were doing this trend report on fast growing fill in the blank. All these questions came in a flurry last spring. Can you give us fast growing herbs, fast growing trees, fast growing shrubs, and it was like, why is everybody interested in all these fast growing things? And the idea is, now we know there is no instant gratification in our industry unless you have lots and lots of money. Then maybe, but really helping people understand what a layered landscape looks like and how, think about that HOA garden where there's just plops of a couple shrubs in the front of a house does not create that really established, like, I have cared for this garden for a long time look. So helping people understand and maybe even providing collections to create that lived-in landscape, understanding what it takes. And then sure, fast growing is going to be, I think, a buzzword next year because people are going to want to know, well, what is going to get me there quicker? And I do believe that some of the larger specimens are going to be even more popular because people are going to be wanting to invest in their landscapes to make them look almost like they've been there for centuries.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
So that's been a really popular one. And then another very specific horticulture related trend is called living fences. And this is a pandemic washout, I would say, I think directly coming from the pandemic, where people invested in their backyards, right? We know they put in pools at dramatic paces. They put in patios. They did hardscaping, and they redid their gardens and lighting and outdoor living rooms and kitchens, and the money that was spent, thank goodness, for us over the pandemic. But now one of the big areas that Thumbtack did a report is that people are wanting to invest in their yards is privacy.
Right.
Now you have all this fun stuff in your backyard, and your neighbors keep popping over with their towel and saying, hey, pool's open. And so they want just a little bit more privacy. But what we took it a step further, and we said, the trend of gardening for wildlife is not a trend anymore. It's now a movement. So we've gone from, as we talked about, going from a peak of we want to garden for pollinators. Here are the plants that this year we're talking about, to this is something people think about in their daily lives. So if we know that people understand that having a healthy ecosystem in their backyard means they don't just have a lawn, we're thinking, well, then their fences, these privacy fences that Thumbtack tells us they want to invest $5,000 in, are most likely they're going to put up living fences.
Yeah.
And so when I gave this report, I went to Star Roses. They're just here in my backyard. So I went to Star and I gave them this presentation, and a woman raised her hand and she said, I live in a neighborhood. It's an HOA, and I am kind of up on a hill, and I can look out at many of my neighbors' yards, and they're all lined with arborvitae. And almost all of them are just these, almost rectangles of arborvitae. And I said, that's great. And that's where this trend is, and where we see it going is, we love arborvitae. We love them. I know that they're a popular seller, but not so much homogeny. Because we know what that does. There are some downsides to a living fence. The cost is not one of them. If you go figure, putting up a real vinyl fence or a wood fence is more expensive than planting the same distance of plants, trees and shrubs and plants. But we know, one pest or disease comes in, could wipe out the entire thing. So it really is important that as growers, as sellers, as landscapers who are helping our customers create this space, we have to make sure that there is diversity in bloom time, diversity in some height, to create a wide array of these types of living fences. Because our customers are interested in all kinds of things. They want privacy, number one. But beyond privacy, do they want more of the English, style formal garden? Do they want a wild P. Olaf garden? Do they want to garden for wildlife? Like, what are their goals? And then we can help them achieve that through the plant material that we suggest.
Oh, and I think too, just at a general level, it speaks to, there's always concerns about, so we've gained all these consumers during the pandemic. What are we going to do to keep them coming back? And you hear so many concerns among other industries, for example, somebody buys a new grill, somebody puts in a pool, somebody adds an outdoor stove. That's all and great. They're not going to do that every year, every 2 or 3 years for that matter. But this is something I think that a homeowner can look to, okay, I want to make a few changes every year. This is how I can do it, I think.
Yes, exactly. Because we don't have the disposable income or the time, more importantly, the time to go add the things that we did during the pandemic. But you're right. What are the small little projects that our customer are going to make each year? And we think this is one of them for this year.
Awesome.
Yeah. The next one we'll just quickly touch on. It's called foraged.
Okay.
And what I think that growers really need to know here is that it's not a cut flower trend. This is not people growing a cut flower garden. This is people growing specific perennials, trees, shrubs for cutting and bringing indoors. So foraging flowers, not food, which was a trend 10 years ago. But this idea of people using their garden, their surrounding spaces, parks if it's legal, roadsides, to cut natural things and bring them indoors. So it kind of goes back to the idea of surrounding ourselves with nature 24/7, but also the idea of how we look at our gardens a little differently. And I'm hoping that we'll create collections for foraging. So these 5 perennials would be a great collection to create this bouquet. So, tying it together, instead of this is what it looks like in the garden or in a container, this is the cut flower bouquet that you could make from it, because that's a big reward for our customers, that they are able to not just put this in their garden, but then they can show it off. It's kind of like growing an edible garden. Now I made this salsa from it. rarely when you see a picture of a tomato sold as a plant, do you not also see the salsa or the pizza, right? They're showing you the benefit. And I think that's one area we can really help our customers, our growers' customers sell those products better, is showing one step further the benefit of being able to cut these and bring them indoor. The last trend is houseplants. We can just touch on it, or we can send people to the website to download it. What do you think?
I think that's fine with me. Yeah, I mean, there's so much good information there that I like that.
Okay, great. So it's called Holy Moly. You got to go download it at gardenmediagroup.com/trends to find out more. And then we'll wrap up, Brian. How about with our color of the year?
Yeah, love it.
This has also been a big one, but it always is. It's always fun. People really want to know what the color is. We skipped the color over the pandemic because it just felt, and then Pantone picked gray. So I'm glad we skipped it. But, for us, the idea of when fashion or the home industries pick their colors, ours are not going to align. Because when we pick our color, we want it to be something that, first of all, can be found in nature, right? We want it to be a natural color that is reflected really in our gardens and in our spaces. But we also want it to be something that is what our customer is doing, not the fashion customer. So last year when we picked Cyber Lime and Pantone picked Peach, peach, I was so depressed when they picked Peach, but it doesn't always have to align. And it took me a while to kind of separate that. Like I really wanted we were right, we're validated in that. But I think I've realized that we're very different industries. And as much as we really value the work that other trend spotting firms do, this is a report for the horticulture industry. There's nothing else like it. And so of course the color is going to be different. Yeah. And so for this year, our color of the year is teal. And you're probably thinking, what plants are in teal? But for us, we picked this because two things. One, you're also going to, your jaw's going to hit the floor when I tell you that Gen Z is the first generation to experience tech nostalgia. So they're experiencing nostalgia for the late 90s, early 2000s tech. I know. Like, wait, weren't the late 90s just like 5 years ago? I don't know how you
Seems like it, yeah.
Seems like it. But they are. It's true. They're experiencing this nostalgia for a time when our electronics weren't so sleek and metal and cold, and they want color. Remember those Mac computers with their cherry, back pieces, and our first iPhones that were really big and bubbly and colorful? So they're experiencing a nostalgia for that era. And the color of that era was teal. If you remember, like kind of the standard Microsoft desktop.
Oh, yeah.
The sky, and it's that color. And that's the color that really evokes this sense of sentimentality that people are having for that time. And it really makes them feel warm. It takes them back to an era of maybe their childhood. So there's a lot of reasons why we picked this beyond that nostalgia. It's a great wellness color, and we think it also goes really well with Cyber Lime. So we love that connection. And then you have to kind of stretch your mind a little bit. But the Beyond Blue Fescue, that the Southern Living Plant Collection, PDSI, it's with their brand Sunset and Southern Living Plant Collections. When we're thinking of teal, it doesn't have to be exactly that Microsoft blue color, but it's in those warm blue colors that you picture in the desert Southwest. If you go to Arizona, the agaves, the blue chalk 6 succulents, these drought tolerant, like xeriscaping plant collections, Senecio, Sunset has another one, the skyscraper Senecio, that are just so calming. And I think that we can really pull out a bunch of our plant collections that achieve this teal color that then help our customers achieve that calm nostalgia state as well.
Well, you mentioned drought tolerance there. And again, I think it's tying the color to the,
benefit.
Yeah, exactly. The benefit of the plant. So that's critical, I think. Yeah. And I'll remind our audience who's listening again that they can go to Garden Media Group's website to download the full report. There's a lot to absorb here. And I think I think really the last question I have for you is, we talked about a lot of things so far. On a personal level, what excites you the most about the future of this industry that you're in? especially as it ties to some of the trends we talked about.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if it ties to the trends at all, but I was at an event. I'm on the board of our Pennsylvania Landscape and Nursery Association, PLNA, and we've started recently doing events again post-pandemic. We're finally getting in the swing of things, and we had one at Watercress Nursery in Oxford, Pennsylvania, and there were probably 60 people in attendance, and 30 of them were young, like really young, like under 30. And because sometimes I still think I'm young and I'm 42, you know, so it's like younger than me. And it was so, and it was a more, not just an age diversity, but in all types of, you know, we had all types of people there, men, women. It was so incredible to see the diversity and the youth. And I think that for me, what excites me most is, of course, who's coming up behind us and the increase, not just in our industry in plants, in horticulture as a profession, but then the interest in horticulture for young people as our customers. Yeah. So they're really seeing it as part of their identity. And I think that for us, that's really exciting. It's not one of those hobbies like knitting, sourdough bread baking. You know, it did not go out with the pandemic. It became ingrained in people's identity. And I think we are just scratching the surface of what that means for us for the future.
Okay. And just to kind of circle back to the very beginning of the conversation, you mentioned your mom. How's your mom doing? I haven't seen her in a little while.
She's great. She's wonderful. She's golfing a lot, gardening a lot, although now she, you know, has some help. A friend of mine helps her in her garden. Knockout is celebrating 25 years next year, you probably know. And so she just planted a bunch of new knockout roses. And she's like, I had Aaron dig the holes for me, but she's still gardening a lot. She's part-time in Florida, part-time in Pennsylvania, living her best life.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Well, again, you know, folks can go to Garden Media Group's website to download the report. And this has been a great conversation with you. And I encourage as many people as possible to look at that report and kind of look at where they're going to be in the future. I love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.